Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome to another instalment of Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. Hope you're all doing well out there. It is gloriously hot in the UK this weekend. Apparently the beginnings of a heat wave that's going to last for at least the next week or so. Temperatures peaking at 37 degrees C, apparently, if some of our tabloid newspapers are to be believed. I'm not sure I believe that myself, but I don't really want to go on the internet and complain about this. And the reason for that is because the few days a year when it is hot here in the UK, we all go on the internet, we all tweet about it, we all blue sky about it, whatever, moan about it on Discord, and we get lots of responses from people who live in much hotter parts of the world telling us to stop moaning because it's nothing compared to what they have to put up with on a day-to-day basis. And perhaps they have a point. Although I will say we don't generally have aircon in the UK, and I don't have aircon here in the studio, so I'm very interested to see how it's going to be over the next week or so. I know this place was almost impossible to keep warm in the winter, so I think I'm going to have the exact opposite problem. I know, where's that tiny violin? It's around here somewhere. Anyway, the more important thing that I wanted to talk about, of course, and getting on to a bit of a serious subject again, was my revelation from last week, although apparently not such a big revelation for some of you, which was my talking about my ADHD diagnosis, my inattentive type ADHD, and my prescription for Elvance, which of course is a medication to help deal with the symptoms of that condition. And I have had quite a few messages from people, DMs and emails, things like that. Forgive me for not wanting to talk about this publicly in the YouTube comments. There are plenty of private ways to contact me, and the people who have contacted me, of course, I have responded to you. And it does mean a lot to me that that really struck a chord with so many of you out there, and that so many of you have found it helpful to hear me talking publicly about it, about the process, and about my own experiences and stuff. And I will say, I don't want to dwell on this too much, and I don't really want to talk about this too much in future episodes. And I think I have decided against making a dedicated video all about this, purely because it's all kind of quite intertwined with all sorts of other stuff from my personal life, and I am very conscious about oversharing stuff on that side of things. But if you do want to reach out to me, I will always be happy to give help and advice and share my experiences in private. But I will say, with another week under my belt, and it has been very, very busy at work in my day job over the past week or so, I have found it completely and utterly transformative, I will say. Just the medication, also understanding how my brain works. And it does give me a lot to think about the past 42 years of my life, but also an awful lot to look forward to for the rest of my life as well, kind of going into it equipped with the right tools and things. So, if that conversation was useful to you and you are either thinking about embarking on that process or already partway down the line, I just want to say best of luck to you. It is very, very well worth pursuing, and like I say, quite life-changing. And on that note, I also talked about looking out for any differences in my delivery in these rambles. You know, would I come across any differently? Will I have lost my spark? I certainly don't feel like I've lost my spark. That was one of the things that I was worried about going onto the medication. But touch wood, it's all good, and I'm still the same happy, fun-loving guy that I used to be. But I wanted to actually listen to a ramble. I don't have the time usually to sit and listen to an entire ramble and listen to myself talk for an hour. But last week I actually put it on in the car for the first time, and the first thing I noticed was the audio quality. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up that I've also made a tweak to my audio workflow for this week's ramble, and I'd like it if any of you had any kind of feedback on that. I think it's going to make quite a big difference to those of you listening in some slightly more challenging environments, in the car, on a plane, on a train, or whatever. Some tweaks to the EQ and compressor and stuff like that. So I am always striving to improve things here at Reese Rambles, and my audio and video quality are certainly a big part of that package. Anyway, I am sat here watching the timer on my camera, very much aware of the fact that I've been waffling on about personal stuff for the past 5 minutes. And that's not what you're here for, is it? You are here for the vintage and retro computing, gaming and technology news that I promised in my opening line. So I think, without further ado, well, all right, there is a little bit more ado, and I'm sure you know what's coming. But after that, we'll get into the stories for this week. And that, of course, to which I was alluding, is a very quick message from our sponsor, PCBWay.com. So, PCBWay have been in the business of providing PCB fabrication services for the past 11 years. And they have built up quite a reputation for quality, fast turnaround times, and attention to detail. But today, they have asked me to remind you about some of their other complementary services. Things that include the likes of CNC machining, 3D printing, injection molding, and sheet metal fabrication. And you can find all of those services on their very easy-to-use website, which is linked down below in the description. So thanks once again to PCBWay for all of your support for Reese Rambles and indeed the wider maker community. Link down in the description. And now, let's get on with the stories for this week. So there has been quite a lot of talk over the past couple of years about the rebirth of a rather important computing brand from the past. That brand, of course, being Commodore, and that rebirth being headed up by Perry Fractic of the YouTube channel Retro Recipes, of course, real name Christian Simpson, British YouTuber living over in LA. And by and large, I think the news from that camp has actually been mostly positive, actually, with the C64 Ultimate being their kind of launch product, a coming together of all sorts of fantastic community projects that were already reasonably successful in their own right. And what Commodore very wisely did was bring them all together, package them all up into a product, market it quite nicely, make it an official thing, and put that out to the world. And the feedback on those has also been very positive from the people that do own them. So by and large, very, very good news, and things looking up for Commodore. Of course, there is another bit of news this week regarding that newly relaunched Commodore, which I will talk about later on. But for now, I wanted to focus on the 64, the Commodore 64, the best-selling computer of all time before the Raspberry Pi came along, and quite rightly so as well. A really fine machine and a very important and influential machine. And I am very pleased to say that it is now being honoured in a new documentary. So if we head over to Kickstarter.com, we can see the campaign here for Commodore 64, The Birth of a Cultural Icon, a documentary that explores the success of the iconic Commodore 64 computer. As we can see, they are at around £25,000 of their £55,000 goal, 537 backers already, and they still have a month to go, so certainly on track to hitting their goal on this. And I just wanted to kind of do my bit to put this out there and to also wish them the best of success as well. Now, if you're wondering who is behind this, we are talking about the Coalfields, Anthony and Nicola, who you may recognise from previous computing documentaries, such as From Bedrooms to Billions, The Amiga Years, and The Rubber-Keyed Wonder, which was the ZX Spectrum documentary that came out a few years ago as well. So just to read from their Kickstarter campaign page, if you grew up in the 1980s, then do you remember the Commodore 64 home computer? If you do, then you'll remember it wasn't just a computer. For many of us, it was the soundtrack of our childhood, of course. Whether you discovered your Commodore 64 on Christmas morning or found it in a department or electrical store, whether you loaded from a floppy disk in the US or waited agonizingly for a cassette tape to load in Europe, the Commodore 64 experience was shared across the world. Whirring disk drives or adjusting tape heads, school computer labs, coding culture, computer clubs, the early demo scene, or just sitting playing games in the bedroom, den, or family room, the C64 was more than just a machine. It was a shared world, and we're making a film that embraces all of those experiences, and we want you to join us for this amazing and highly nostalgic journey. So we've got some more flowery, nostalgic language here, and deservedly so. I will say I'm not criticising them for that. Just talking a bit about the history of the C64 and the influence that it had on the community at large. We've got some rather wonderful captures of some games here. We've got, what is this, Pole Position, I think? It's not Pole Position, is it? That's the Atari game. Or maybe it is. It looks like Pole Position. Was that released on the C64? Anyway, there you go. We've got, more importantly, I think, Impossible Mission, which was an absolutely brilliant game back in the day. I actually had this on the Atari ST. I think I had Impossible Mission 2. But yeah, a great kind of exploring spy-based platform type game. It was certainly a lot more advanced than the the Marios and the Sonics and things that they had on the consoles at the time. A very, very smart game indeed. We've got, what is this? Maniac Mansion we've got here as well. And some other, clips from some other games as well. Scrolling through this, we do have a mention of the new Commodore. I can see Mr. Perifractic himself there grinning away, along with the rest of the revived Commodore team. And indeed, they are going to be interviewed and involved with this documentary as well, which is nice, kind of bringing things full circle. We've got the Commodore CEO, Jack Tramiel, there. Of course, they'll be telling his story. Founded Commodore and then obviously went on famously to take over Atari as well. Very, very interesting intertwined past between two of my favourite companies in the computing industry. And they'll be talking about the technology behind the machine, about the development scene around the machine, all those wonderful games and bits of software and stuff, as you might expect. And I will say, their previous documentaries, the ones that I mentioned before, From Bedrooms to Billions, is brilliant. You should watch it. The Amiga years, which I haven't watched, and I really do need to get around to, and the Rubber Keyed Wonder, which of course was the ZX Spectrum documentary that I mentioned. That's an iconic British machine from Sinclair. They're all great, so I would expect this to be on par with, if not better than, their previous efforts. Very, very high quality, very well researched and produced indeed. So very excited about this. There has been some talk about the delays around the Rubber Keyed Wonder specifically. One of their previous documentaries was actually delayed by a few years. Not sure what the story was behind that, so people are kind of mindful of that going into this one. But they have always delivered in the past. And I would expect them to deliver on this one. Like I've said in the past, I do talk quite a bit about various Kickstarter campaigns and things, but I will only talk about the ones that I would personally back myself. And this is certainly one of them. So yeah, Commodore 64, the birth of a cultural icon, a very comprehensive documentary about the Commodore 64, one of the most important computers to have ever existed. Just wanted to wish these two, the Caulfields, every success in the production of their documentary. Of course, very early stages yet, and indeed do my bit to put the word out there. So if you're interested in backing this and you want to see this come to fruition, please do check out the link down in the description, as well as, of course, links to everything else that I will be talking about, as always, in this week's Ramble. So, one thing that I am personally very passionate about, and of course I know it's a passion that's shared by many of you out there as well, is the preservation of our shared cultural heritage, that is video games, and of course the wider context of the technology itself. Technology that touches all of our lives pretty much all day, every day these days. And hard to overstate as well, I think, the importance of the video game industry. The biggest entertainment industry in the world by revenue, bigger than movies, bigger than music. And over the years, I think it's one that has had its fair share of challenges as far as preservation has been concerned. Stuff like bit rot, of course, to do with the original media. We've got discs and tapes and things degrading as time goes on. And that's perhaps not unique to the gaming industry. Of course, it does affect old films and music as well. But maybe more importantly, and certainly something that has risen to prominence in more recent years, decisions that have been made by the actual game studios or indeed the publishers themselves. We're talking about stuff like DRM, we're talking about online requirements for games, or indeed games that are just entirely online based. And it's all well and good going out and buying the game and playing it and enjoying it when it's brand new, but a couple of years down the line, when the studio's not really making any money from it anymore and they kind of lose interest in it, they can completely on a whim just decide to switch it off, and then nobody can play it anymore. And all right, it doesn't seem like that kind of big of a deal on the surface. Like, oh, I can't play my favourite game anymore. Oh, boo-hoo, I'm going to move on and play something else. But like I say, this is our cultural heritage, and I do think that this is as important as movies and music, and something that, you know, people in future wanting to go back and learn about these things and experience these things for themselves are being denied that opportunity. So I do think it's important, and I do like to hammer that point home every time this comes up. But to that end, over the past few years, I have been following the progress of a campaign called Stop Killing Games, which was launched by a chap called Ross, who has a YouTube channel called Accursed Farms, and you can head over to that channel and check out the whole history of that if you like. I'm not going to go over the entire thing here, but there is a great story. I will just point to this over on the BBC News website. I meant to mention this last week, and I think it completely slipped my mind. But this week, I do have a very good reason to mention it. So if you want to know, if you want a nice condensed history of what this campaign is all about and kind of the current state of play and things, you could certainly do worse than to go and read this story over on the BBC. So The Gamers Taking on the Industry to Stop It Switching Off Games by Laura Kress. Can a company take away something you've already paid for? And of course, I've already explained all of this. Ross Scott, that's his surname, started in 2024. And there he is with his magnificent flowing mane and beard. A really great chap, Ross. He's a good egg. But yeah, I'm not going to read through this story because ultimately this is all old news. And if you've been following along with this, you're already well aware of the backstory behind the campaign. But there has been some progress because an important part of this campaign is putting pressure on world governments to try to create some consumer laws around this. We're talking about the US government, we're talking about the UK, and indeed about the EU predominantly. They're the three that I have been following. There are movements in other parts of the world as well, and I certainly don't mean to kind of diminish their efforts. But yeah, it kind of fell flat in the US, as I reported. Nothing really came of that. Here in the UK, we did have a petition that was actually doing really well. And then I believe we had a general election, which wiped that out. And then there was a new petition. And then I don't think much really came of that from what I remember. It was a very kind of non-answer. They are obliged to talk about this in Parliament, but that doesn't actually mean that they're obliged to make a decision. At least the decision that those of us were wanting them to make. But where this has actually picked up quite a lot of traction and is actually making some quite significant wins is in the EU Parliament. And they have said this week, in fact, just a couple of days ago, as of the time of recording, that they are going to be actually launching a bit of an initiative around this and exploring it further, which I think is quite promising news indeed. So this is digitalstrategy.ec.europa.eu. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it? And it is an official European Commission web page as well. So if you want to keep up with what the European Commission are up to, you can head over to that website, digital-strategy.eu. It's linked down below. Anyway, the headline here, Commission will engage with industry following European Citizens Initiative on the disabling of video games by publishers. This is an official press release by the European Commission. The European Commission will engage with consumers and publishers by the end of 2026 to explore ways to improve industry standards as a response to the European Citizens Initiative Stop Destroying Video Games. I guess it's named slightly differently in the EU, but anyway. It doesn't change the thrust of the message. Anyway, modern video games often rely on publishers' servers to function. Publishers may stop supporting these servers, leading the games to become partially or entirely unplayable. The ECI therefore invited the Commission to propose legislation ensuring that players can continue to play the video games after the publishers stop providing support for these games commercially. The Commission considers that at this stage it cannot propose a legal obligation to keep video games playable after they stop being provided commercially. This is due also to existing intellectual property rights. Under EU copyright law, rights holders enjoy exclusive rights over their creations. In addition to copyright, other intellectual property rights may also be relevant as they may protect different visual and technological aspects of a video game. Existing EU consumer law already provides for important safeguards protecting the economic interests of consumers. Video game providers must inform consumers about the duration and the conditions for terminating the contract before the consumers sign up for the video game. The directive on digital content and digital services provides consumers with remedies when the content or service provided does not conform with the contract and what consumers could reasonably expect. Consumers may be entitled to proportionate refund of their purchases. So that's referring to part of this that has already been enacted and which I have reported on in the past. In the EU, at least, if publishers do have a cut-off date for their online services that will render the game unplayable, they need to actually make that very visible on the game's packaging or as part of the game's marketing, which is a very real win. So at least we are now in a situation where these games aren't being turned off completely unexpectedly. We haven't got mothers and well-meaning grandparents going to the shops and buying their kiddies a new game only to realise that the servers have already been turned off, because hopefully the switch-off date is on the packaging. But they are talking about going one step further, and it seems the complication here is to do with copyright. And I think that is an important consideration. Of course, these game studios own the rights to these games. They own the copyright and the trademarks and things, and the expectation that they would release at least part of the game, like the servers and perhaps some of the source code and stuff, when the game is officially switched off, does kind of run in contradiction to perhaps copyright. And, it's kind of quite an important debate and a bit of back and forth to see how the two will kind of interact with each other. So I get that. Actually, they're doing their due diligence, as we would expect from the EU. But again, siding with consumers, as we would expect. So I think it's positive news. It's certainly not the end of the road, and it looks like this is going to be an ongoing thing, and they have promised that this will be delivered by the end of 2026 as well. So interesting to see what comes of this, and what kind of compromise they're going to come up with, taking the best interests of publishers and gamers into account. So still ongoing, still sounding quite promising, I think. And watch this space, and indeed the YouTube channel Accursed Farms, if you want even more detailed coverage for more information on the Stop Killing Games initiative. Some more excellent news next from the world of game preservation, and I wanted to talk about this one back to back with the previous story because it does help to highlight the multifaceted approach to this that I think is very important. So I just talked about putting pressure on the original publishers of games to support their games after they've officially decided to shut down the online servers. What form that will take, we're not quite sure yet, whether they'll be handing over the source code of those servers to the community. Of course, that would be the ideal, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what pressure the EU puts on those companies. But as mentioned, there are multiple approaches to this, and they all work together hand in hand. So we have stuff like emulators that allow us to experience those older games on modern systems, or indeed perhaps on other vintage systems that they were never intended to be run on. We've got stuff like flashcarts, of course, to work around that bit rot that I talked about at the beginning of the previous story, those old discs and tapes and things that are stopping working because of just degradation of the physical media over time. We've got stuff like the Mister, of course, that rather excellent hardware-based emulation system. I am going to use the word emulation. I know it upsets people, but it's good for engagement. And we have things like remasters and things as well, whether they be official remasters or perhaps ports of those older games to modern systems, making them accessible, making them playable, and indeed often adding all sorts of nice user experience improvements as well. Now, one thing that there has been quite a spotlight on recently, and quite rightly so as well, is recompilation. So the process of taking the old original released game, that finalized executable game code that ran on those consoles and those computers of the past, taking it all apart and turning it back into source code. Not exactly line for line the original source code, I will say, but at least something that recompiles back into the finished product. So at least we know that the process works both ways. Fascinating area if you want to go and do some further reading. But we've had the Nintendo 64, the N64, of course, quite famously. We've had native ports to the PC now of all sorts of N64 games, which I have reported on in the past. We've got stuff like Mario Kart, Super Mario 64, quite recently. Animal Crossing I talked about as well. I think there was a GameCube. Was that the GameCube game? And last week I talked about Xbox Live Arcade from the Xbox 360 and how there is now a recompilation project for that as well, taking some of those excellent ports and remasters on that system and making remasters of those in their own right. The never-ending cycle continues. Now, that was Daytona USA, but this week we have perhaps a more noteworthy title as well, and one that actually links into all of that N64 stuff that I was just talking about, because back in the day, Rare, that's a wonderful British developer based just down the road from me, released a game called GoldenEye on the N64, and a lot of people will tell you that it's overhyped, but I think it fits into the same category as perhaps... I don't know, like the Beatles, maybe? You know, people say the Beatles are overhyped as well, but there's no denying that actually they were massively influential and they did some pretty innovative stuff. And you can't take that away from them. And that's also true of GoldenEye on the N64. What a tenuous link, but we're going to roll with it. Now, that game was actually going to be re-released on the Xbox 360 on Xbox Live Arcade. And this is also something that I've reported on in the past. And that was leaked. So if you have an Xbox 360 emulator, you can actually go and seek out the cancelled but pretty much 99% complete version of N64 GoldenEye that was made for the Xbox 360 with all of its wonderful high-resolution textures and polygons and things and all of its nice quality of life improvements. And you can run it under an Xbox 360 emulator. But now, all of those various facets have come together to give us a recompilation project of GoldenEye on the Xbox 360, on Xbox Live Arcade. This is exciting stuff. So, if we head over to tomshardware.com, cancelled Xbox 360 version of GoldenEye 007 gets recompiled for PC. No emulator, the game runs as a real native executable, insists dev. Enjoy this rare classic with a modern Windows controller, online multiplayer, post-effects filters, and great frame rates. Online multiplayer as well, blimey. Story here by Mark Tyson, of course, famous brother of Mike Tyson, who decided to go into tech writing rather than boxing. GoldenEye Recomp v1.0 has been released on GitHub by developer SunJC. Gaming-focused social media channels are excited with this release, which provides a native PC port of GoldenEye 007 on the Xbox 360/XBLA, built by statically recompiling the original game into C++ with the RexGlue SDK, which we talked about last week with that Daytona USA recomp project, of course. No emulator, the game runs as a real native executable. And the developer here talks about playing the original N64 classic for hours in the late 90s, as I'm sure many of us did. But this version comes with numerous benefits, including support for modern Windows controllers, online multiplayer, widescreen support, and post-effects filters at a purported stable 60 FPS frame rate. GoldenEye was a seminal release for consoles, establishing... Seminal release, that's a... unfortunate turn of phrase, isn't it? GoldenEye was a seminal release for consoles, establishing that FPS games were a compelling proposition beyond the realms of PCs and keyboard and mouse control. Just talks a bit here about the history behind the game and why it was so noteworthy. One of the first console first-person shooters that seemed to get everything right as far as controls and things and gameplay was concerned, but also excellent level design, weapons, and all of the rest of it. So yeah, a real milestone in console gaming. But yeah, we have a bullet-pointed list here. If and when you get the Xbox 360 version of the game recompiled for PC, you should expect the following thrilling benefits. So we've got running natively on Windows, of course, we've mentioned controller support, online multiplayer. So that includes... My goodness, this heat's getting to me. That includes LAN play, Hamachi, a playit.gg, or a public server. We've got an in-game pause and settings menu, so we can change stuff like video settings, resolution, frame limits, full screen, online setup. We've got brightness, contrast, saturation, vignette, and some FX filter presets as well. And also some fixes for the original frame timing. Of course, that was very closely tied to the N64 and its rather interesting 3D graphics hardware, which was based on SGI stuff, I believe. And that results in it running at a stable 60 FPS natively on the PC. Now, as with many of these things, of course, the original assets, the original game files and things are covered by copyright by their original publishers, and of course we don't want these projects to be shut down by those publishers. So very wisely, they have provided a tool for you to be able to build this. So you need to get hold of the original game files yourself and run a script, which then takes those files and basically takes all the bits that it needs from those files and incorporates those into this native Windows version. So yeah, the usual route, I will say, although I think it's probably safe to say that this will also pop up on unofficial channels in its completed form as well. But yes, coincidentally, this recomp release comes as the latest James Bond title. 00 First Light rides high in the charts on PCs and current-gen consoles. First Light is also the centerpiece of the latest NVIDIA GeForce bundling promotion, and apparently you can grab a free copy of 007 First Light when you buy a GeForce RTX 50 series. Look at that, I've just done some advertising, unwittingly, for NVIDIA as well. But we're 8 minutes into this story, and I don't want to have to re-record it yet again. So yeah, the crux here is that if you want to check out that rather excellent but cancelled and never before officially released Xbox Live Arcade version of the N64 classic GoldenEye, you can now go and grab a script and the original files and create your own native Windows version of it with some fantastic modern quality of life improvements, which I think makes it the best way to check out GoldenEye in 2026, and I certainly don't think this is going to be the last that we're hearing from these recompilation projects. And now, in the immortal words of Monty Python, for something completely different, going from gaming to hardware. And a big hardware announcement this week that has the whole retro sphere abuzz for all the wrong reasons, it seems. I've seen an awful lot of debate around this announcement, and not all of it positive, I'm afraid to say. And not any of it positive, actually, based on what I've seen, but we've got to cover this because it is big news. And of course, I alluded to this earlier, and it's the phone. It's the Commodore phone, okay, from the new Commodore, headed up by Perifractic. So yeah, let's just go straight to the website and see what this is all about. So he has this renewed focus and this obsession on taking us back to simpler times, to the good old days, before people were constantly online and constantly doom scrolling. And don't get me wrong, I'm actually fully on board with that. I think it is quite important. I mean, I have made great strides in recent weeks and months to try to reduce my social media usage, to try to stop doom scrolling entirely. You know, I've gone back to reading books and playing proper games and that kind of stuff. So I don't disagree with the kind of underlying incentives here, I have to say. I think it's a good concept, but it is a concept that I do think is fundamentally flawed. Now, it's not my place to sit here and pick this apart. The debate has been had already all over the internet, but the hardware itself, as we can see, is a flip phone, a good old-fashioned flip phone like the old Motorola Razr and stuff that we had back in the day. But this one is a little bit more sophisticated than that. So this is running Sailfish OS, which is a Linux-based operating system. So it's not Android and it's not iOS. So it is kind of the third competitor in that space, which is interesting in its own right, I think, and quite a bold choice. And what has got a lot of people talking is this trailer, which has been making the rounds on social media. So it's called the Callback 8020, and I think, I actually sat and watched this trailer. I saw it when it first popped up before a lot of the debate around it. And the one thing that stood out to me about the trailer was kind of, firstly, a lot of the AI stuff, generative AI video and imagery used quite obviously in this video. And it's something that Perifractic has come under some criticism for in the past, and does kind of fly in the face of his talk about, going back to analog times and things. You'd think they would have used real actors in this and kind of old-fashioned film techniques and things like that from the 90s, but haven't decided to go down that route. I will also say that if you do watch this trailer, and you haven't seen it already, and I will link to it, the voiceover at the end is the man himself, and he doesn't sound very interested at all. He doesn't sound very enthused about his own product, which is bizarre. But there you go. Anyway, yeah, here's some of this AI imagery that I talked about if you are watching this on YouTube. So it's quite, it's quite obvious. That is one thing that has been debated. The other thing that has been debated is the price of this thing, but we'll talk about that in a second. So it runs 99% of Android apps without running Android. So as mentioned, this is Sailfish, made by Jolla, which is a kind of a third-party mobile operating system that powers a lot of these cheap Chinese feature phones and things. It's got a flip closure and T9 style texting, adds mindful friction to use. So they are making the fact that it is more difficult to use than a smartphone a selling point. It has got HD music. So one thing that this thing does incorporate, quite interestingly, is a very high-quality digital to analog converter. So if you use your phone to listen to music, particularly through higher-end headphones or perhaps a higher-end hi-fi system, this is actually quite a decent bit of hardware. It has SID chiptune ringtones as well, of course, which is harking back to the Commodore 64 and quite a nice connection to their previous product, the C64 Ultimate. And it does also come with some earphones as well. Oh, it's got built-in radio tuner. That's quite unusual in this day and age. Worldwide network support, Wi-Fi and hotspot as well. So, yeah, part of the marketing around this whole switching off and living kind of a more offline life, is this built-in blocking of social media and browsers. So you won't be able to install Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or anything like that on this phone. I don't even know if it has a camera. Does it have a camera? Yeah, it looks like it does have a camera. That's not mentioned at all. But yeah, so none of those kind of endless scrolling, doom scrolling social media apps available on here. It does support messaging apps. That is quite an important distinction. So WhatsApp and like Telegram and Signal and kind of all of those are supported on here. So you won't be completely cut off from the world if you get one of these phones. Apparently, they are pledging to not sell people's data. It's a privacy-first operating system. It's got tactile physical buttons and ambient dome LED notifications, which, of course, also harks back to some of those old Nokia phones and things from the past. And it also has a privacy button on the back, which you double tap, and apparently you can go off-grid. So that's like an airplane mode button, I guess. We've got WhatsApp and SMS pre-installed, support Signal, Telegram, WeChat, and more. Even iMessage, apparently. That's quite interesting, isn't it? All at the speed of predictive text input. We have Smart Where It Counts. So just looking at some of the marketing stuff here on the website. So we've got some more AI-generated imagery here, audio file grade DAC, HD audio and lossless files. Again, I do think that's actually a very cool thing. Oh, there we go. We've got a 48 megapixel rear camera as well with a flash and intelligent autofocus. That's quite a decent spec, to be fair. Yeah, DAC chips from ESS and Cirrus Logic. Wow, strong Commodore connections. Yeah, ESS created the speech synthesis in Commodore games like Ghostbusters and Impossible Mission, which I talked about earlier. And yeah, we also have SID ringtones. We've got a built-in FM radio, a MediaTek Helio G81 processor with efficient passive cooling. And it says here that pre-orders go live on the 30th of June at 10 Central, is that CEST, Central European Standard Time. So they're calling the white version the Proto Pet White, of course, harking back to the Commodore PET, one of their computers from the past. And we have some other models here, which are quite creatively named. We've got the SX Silver, the Basic Beige, the Starlight Edition, which has caused a bit of a stir because it's got this wonderful transparent case. People are always talking about wanting to bring back transparent electronics like we had in the 90s, and it seems that Commodore are actually doing this, which is quite cool. And we've got the Founders Edition, which is the Trump Phone Edition, the Gold Edition, although I don't think this one has actual gold involved. And yeah, this is where the debate kind of starts, because if you wanted to pick this up as a second phone to, perhaps carry around with you, you can't really live without a modern smartphone, I don't think, in this day and age. I mean, contactless payments, I guess if you've got something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something, you can use that for payments, so I suppose that's okay. But stuff like these authenticator apps and things that we have on our smartphones that are kind of essential to modern life, I don't know. Could you leave the house without your smartphone and just take the Commodore phone instead? Possibly, I suppose, depending on your requirements. But a big part of this is the price, because this does cost the same as a modern smartphone. I've seen people point out that you can actually get something like a Pixel 9a for the same price as this phone. And the Google Pixel 9a is a bloody good smartphone. I mean, I've got the Pixel 8? I can't even remember. But yeah, so the prices for this, Commodore Callback 8020, start at £375, and that's a pre-order price. So you get $100 off. I don't have the dollar prices in front of me, I'm afraid, but this is a UK-based podcast after all, so you can do your own conversions. But yeah, so £413 retail for the basic Commodore Proto Pet White model. Same again for the silver and the beige, I believe. Then we've got the Starlight Edition, which is $450 at retail, $413 if you pre-order before, basically if you're in the first round of pre-orders. And the Gold Founders Edition, which is £525, or $480 if you pre-order it. It's very, very expensive for a Sailfish, essentially feature phone. I'm not sure I'd go so far. I mean, they are touting this as a dumb phone, so to use their own kind of terminology and their own marketing, I think it's a tough sell. I do think it's a tough sell. I mean, it is kind of a well-rounded and thought-out product with some quite interesting, features and selling points and things. There have been people also pointing out that this is just a rebranded Chinese flip phone. I haven't been able to find the specific model, but I'm sure you can if you look. And people talking about the wholesale price for this particular model being about 25 quid. Does make it a tough sell, I will say. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tear this thing apart. I am just talking about some of the conversations I've seen on the wider internet. But yeah, the combination of, I think, some of the AI marketing that hasn't quite sat right with some people, and the pricing, particularly based on what some of these Chinese feature phones are available for. I keep using that phrase, feature phone. I know Sailfish is a full-blown smartphone OS, but again, that's kind of based on their own marketing. And I have also heard some talk that this won't support some of the secure Android apps like banking apps and that kind of thing. So that's perhaps also important to bear in mind, although perhaps we need some clarification on that from Commodore. Anyway, that's basically my take on all of the talk around the Commodore Callback 8020. Very interesting product. Certainly off the back of their first product, the C64 Ultimate, which was by and large very well received and very well regarded. I think this one's going to be a much tougher sell. So, in the past, I have talked at length about Nightdive Studios and their fantastic remasters of some of those wonderful 90s first-person shooters. And of course, this also harks back to what I was talking about earlier about this multi-pronged approach to preserving games. This being yet another one, official remasters, so we can enjoy those old games on modern hardware. Now, last week, I talked about their upcoming release of Thief, which has been very much anticipated. It is an iconic game from back in the day and a pretty groundbreaking game as well when it comes to stealth and all of that kind of thing. I've talked in the past about how much I've enjoyed their remasters of Doom and Dark Forces, which I played through, and talked about checking out stuff like System Shock as well. And at the moment, how I am playing through their remaster of Heretic and Hexen as well. Oh, Quake. I always forget Quake and Quake 2. Absolutely massive, and I love those a lot. But loads and loads of great 90s FPSs under their belt, running on their own in-house Kex engine, of course. And we have just had another announcement from Nightdive. Now, this one I think was previously announced and was previously talked about and known about. But the big news here is that there is a launch trailer now, and you can also go and pre-order this on various platforms. So this is SiN Reloaded. We have a bit of a trailer here on YouTube, as mentioned. So let's just hit play on this. And SiN came around. It was 1998 that SiN was originally released. And I think it was I mean, it has its own kind of cult following, but it kind of fell by the wayside, I think, at the time, with games like Quake 2 and I think Quake 3 around that time. Half-Life, of course, absolutely massive. And then we had stuff in the works like Deus Ex, which were really revolutionary in their own right. And SiN was kind of one of that whole collection of games. Thief as well, of course. And it's one that I haven't personally checked out. I don't know much about it. I remember it being marketed at the time. And I remember it being kind of quite memorable for its distinctive art style in the cutscenes, its character design, things like that. A game that had quite a lot of character compared to perhaps some of the first-person shooters that came before it. And also its interactivity, much in the same vein as Half-Life and Duke Nukem 3D. There you go. There's another one. So many of them. It's such an exciting time to be around and be a PC gamer in the late 90s. So, yes, you can pre-order this now, but we'll just read some of the description from Nightdive's official page. From Nightdive Studios, SiN Reloaded is a completely remastered experience of the 1998 shooter from Ritual Entertainment. This diamond-in-the-rough, story-driven FPS features memorable characters, horrific enemies, and a devastating arsenal that push the Quake 2 engine to its limits. Enter a near-future dystopian world as security consultant Colonel John R. Blade as you take on the seductively evil Dr. Alexis Sinclair. When Alexis, the CEO of SiNTech Industries, begins injecting the streets with a DNA-altering drug, it's time to reassess the laws of morality. As Blade, you've made a religion out of fighting crime. Now you're going to make Alexis pay for her sins by taking on her unholy army of genetically engineered mutants. SiN was celebrated for introducing a groundbreaking amount of interactivity in every level. Hack your way into computer terminals using DOS-style code, use elevators and security cameras to wreak havoc. You can even zip around in a forklift, patrol boat, and a helicopter. Your actions have consequences, creating branching paths as the game progresses. SiN also helped to pioneer the ability to knock weapons out of an opponent's hands and take area-specific damage from their attacks. It is available now to pre-order on Steam, on GOG, on the PlayStation, and also on the Xbox, although notably not on the Switch for some reason. But yeah, like I say, a game that passed me by back in the day, and another one that I am quite excited to check out. I have been very much enjoying not only revisiting some of these great games from my past via Nightdive's remasters, but also experiencing some new games that I perhaps missed out on the first time around. So if you're in the same boat as me and you're interested in checking out SiN, you will find that link down below, as per all the other stories from this week's Ramble. Now, I am very much aware of the fact that time is pressing on, that I need to get to my CrossFit class very, very soon, and that I've also spent quite a bit of time covering this week's stories so far in a lot of depth. But there is, of course, a lot of other material that has been posted and discussed over on my Discord server, the ctrl-alt-rees Discord, which you can join using the link down in the description, or indeed in the show notes on your podcast app. And of course, it would be very rude of me not to talk about those as well, because this is all really interesting stuff. So, without further ado, I'm going to very quickly rattle through a few more stories for you. And these are jumping off points for some further reading. So if you want to know a bit more about these, do check out the links in the usual places, because they are all fascinating in their own right. I just don't feel like I have a huge amount to say about them. And indeed, like the other stories that I've covered so far in this week's Ramble, there is very much a Commodore angle to a lot of these as well. Seems Commodore has been talked about quite a lot just lately, and perhaps deservedly so as well. And on that note, let's jump into the very first one, which is the Commodore Datasette. Now, this was the tape deck, the tape player that, of course, was available for use with the Commodore 64, which we talked about earlier in depth. And someone has hacked this, or built a hardware project around this to turn it into a boombox. Of course, it's got a tape deck built in, so it seems like an obvious use of the hardware. It's got amplifier and speakers built in, and it looks like a very cool hardware project. So, yeah, this story is reported by Nick Build over on Hackster.io. Time to pump up the volume. Jan Deregi hacked a classic Commodore Datasette into a totally radical 80s style retro boombox. Very cool hardware project here. We've got a nice in-depth look at this project, as well as a link to the YouTube video covering this in even more detail. And yeah, I just love these kind of hacks and hardware projects based on old school hardware. So yeah, Commodore Datasette boombox, excellent start to this little roundup. Next up, one of my favourite companies, Retro HQ. Of course, they made the Jaguar game drive, the flashcart for the Atari Jaguar. And they also made one for the Atari 7800 as well, which they're both consoles where in the past, people have not really come up with working flashcarts due to some quite complicated technical limitations. But in this case, James from Retro HQ has actually cracked both of those and come up with some very successful and very useful products for those communities. So my hat is off to him. I've also spoken to him as well, and he is a genuinely, thoroughly nice chap and an incredibly smart guy, as you might expect. And this is for the PolyMaster game drive. So this is slightly shorter than the usual PGM cart, but it has an additional grip ridge for pulling the damn thing out. I'll iterate on how that works, but this is a first pass. So the PolyMaster game drive, not a console I know much about and not a console that I've done much research on, but preservation of these more obscure bits of hardware I think is vitally, vitally important, and it's really nice that someone is paying some attention to this console. So a flashcart coming soon from Retro HQ for the PolyMaster game drive for all of you game drive fans out there. Now, next up, we have an open source version of DOS. Of course, we already have FreeDOS out there and a few other attempts at modern incarnations of DOS. And this is another one, LibreDOS, a DOS-compatible operating system written from scratch in C and assembly. Uses a 16-bit real mode kernel and a broad DOS API that runs classic DOS software, including 32-bit titles that use DOS extenders. Built from the ground up to be as compatible as possible with original official DOS. And yeah, it is very kind of DOS-like, but of course, modern programming tools used to create this. And indeed, it is open source, very exciting. So nice to see another offering in this world. LibreDOS version 0.1. And yeah, top work. Great to see. The next couple of stories are about the Amiga. So for all of you Amiga fans out there, firstly, we have the A600 Junior motherboard, which is a fully built drop-in replacement for the Amiga 600 motherboard. It has some nice kind of modern, tweaks and things and improvements, so that's always great to see. 350 quid, but that is all brand new and it is fully built as well. That is, of course, based on you supplying your own original A600 motherboard because of those custom chips, which nobody is making brand new. So yeah, I suppose that's quite an important distinction to make. If you don't have one of those available, it is going to cost you 500 quid, 150 quid for them to supply those custom chips. But yeah, it is a refined and improved PCB layout. As mentioned, it's got stronger VCC rails, so much more stable on the power supply side of things, and modified, improved op-amp audio amplifier circuits and stuff like that. So yeah, support for extra drives and a few other rather nice modern quality of life improvements for your Amiga 600. And my final story in this roundup, again from the Amiga world, is Copperline. This is an Amiga emulator, but this is a basically what they call a cycle-accurate emulator, I guess, which is built to actually replicate the hardware at a hardware level, but in software, of course. If you wanted to replicate the hardware at hardware level, there's the Mr. Core, which is excellent. But yeah, in this case, this is Copperline, an Amiga emulator that models the hardware, not individual titles. So the chip bus is arbitrated per color clock. Copper and Blitter are scheduled per DMA slot. 68,000 interrupt latency is modeled. And timing-sensitive demos and games run at full speed. So this is a incredibly accurate, cycle-accurate emulator for the Amiga. Of course, important if you want to check out demos and things, but also if you're creating those demos, perhaps an easier way of creating those than working on the original hardware. Always great to see this level of detail going into emulators and into preservation. Of course, ties back quite nicely to some of the other topics of this week's Ramble. So, yes, not wanting to brush any of those stories under the rug. They're all very exciting in their own right. And please do go and do some further reading if you're interested in any of those. And that, my dearest ramblers, brings us around rather neatly to my regular video of the week section, wherein I talk about a video, or indeed videos, that has educated, inspired, or entertained, otherwise improved my life in some small way that I've seen here on the old YouTubes in the past week. Often they are retro, vintage, computing, technology, gaming related. Often they aren't. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's more than one. And I do have a real mixed bag for you this week. So I think without further ado, I am going to jump straight into these because hopefully you'll find them quite interesting. And the first one is The Offspring. So yeah, very much not retro or vintage computing or gaming, but I think it's fair to say very much vintage. This is their 30th anniversary of their Smash album, which was such an important album to me when I was growing up. You know, stuff like Smash, Nirvana's Nevermind, and In Utero, we got Green Day Dookie, and all of that stuff was very important to me in my formative years. Playing all those games back in the 90s on my PC, and I would quite often have these blaring out in the background. And what The Offspring have done here, one of my favourite bands, and I actually saw them live last year as well, which was excellent. They are absolutely brilliant live, even these days. And what they've done is they've played the entire album live, the entire Smash album, all 41 minutes of it. And it's the first time that Offspring fans such as myself have actually heard some of these songs live. Songs like Genocide and Killboy Powerhead and stuff like that. Obviously, they used to play them as part of their sets back in the day. But as they had their bigger albums and, you know, the Crazy Taxi stuff and the Americana stuff later on, that kind of older stuff fell by the wayside as they were limited on time, quite understandably. So hearing this whole album played in order, live, and at such high quality as well, and them doing such an absolutely brilliant job of it. One of the first outings for their new drummer as well, because this was recorded a couple of years ago. I love this. I thought this was absolutely brilliant, and I know a lot of people in my community will appreciate this as well. So that's linked down below. Smash Live, the 30th anniversary, 41-minute long recording of that. Secondly, I have another Tom Scott video for you. I've been enjoying these on my TV, and his return to YouTube, a bit less polished, but no less interesting, and his perhaps a bit less researched as well up front, by his own admission. So he's going out and checking all these cool things around the UK, and perhaps not researching them as much up front as he used to do, but that means that we do get his genuine reactions to these as well, which I think is really interesting. And of course, it's Tom Scott. So I should not have liked the world's first smart home, a 25-minute long video over on Tom Scott's channel. And I don't want to spoil too much about this, but when he says smart home, this is proper Victorian engineering. This is an eccentric Victorian engineer who's responsible for inventing some really important things back in kind of that era, and applied all of that knowledge and reused some of those inventions in his own house. And it's really cool to see all the mechanization and stuff that's kind of around this otherwise quite grand, I will say, but otherwise quite normal kind of Victorian manor house. And just, I love gadgets and gizmos, and the ingenuity behind some of this as well, I thought was absolutely fascinating. So, yeah, do go check it out. Tom Scott, the small channel that he is, it's nice to give him a bit of a boost and a bit of support, just in case you hadn't heard of him. And finally, my third video is something different entirely. This was posted by Steve's Tech Shed, I believe, yes, it was, just this morning, over on my Discord server. And this is Robot Wars, if you remember this. I know there's like BattleBots and stuff over in America as well, but this was our version, Robot Wars. And famously presented by Craig Charles, I think he was the best known presenter of this, but the first series was presented by Jeremy Clarkson and indeed Philippa Forrester. And Jeremy Clarkson of Top Gear fame and more recently The Grand Tour and Clarkson's Farm. I've actually just finished watching Clarkson's Farm, the latest series. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Jeremy Clarkson, I will say, but he is quite endearing in Clarkson's Farm. So, but yeah, this is episode 1 of series 1 of Robot Wars back in the day. Of course, people building robots and radio-controlled robots and putting them to battle in that arena. And very important and much loved part of British TV heritage as well. So, that's the thing, and I want to draw your attention to that. That is on the official Robot Wars YouTube channel as well, so it is an official release. Hopefully this is available outside of the UK. It's just entertaining viewing. It's stupid, I know, but again, some cool engineering going into this, and certainly this first episode as well. People kind of not knowing what the series is about and kind of learning as they go, and that's always fascinating to see, knowing the big cultural icon that this series eventually turned into. So yeah, they're my 3 videos of the week. We have the 30th anniversary of Smash by The Offspring, played live at 41 minutes long over on their official channel. One of my favourite albums of all time. We have Tom Scott and his smart home with all of that fantastic Victorian engineering. And we have the very first episode of Robot Wars from back in the 90s. Have we got a date on this? This would have been early 90s. I can't find a date, and I am rapidly running out of time, so go and check it out yourself. All linked down below, as always, in the description on YouTube, or indeed in the show notes if you are watching this on Spotify, or listening to this on Spotify. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I have for this week's ramble, but I wanted to end on a rather sad note, a rather unfortunate note. Yeah, and you may have noticed that I haven't covered a Doom story in this week's ramble, but there has been one. There has been quite a big one that's been in the news and that's been doing the rounds in the community. And yeah, shout out to the Doom Shrine behind me, which of course is my collection of Doom releases and paraphernalia from over the years. One of my favourite games of all time. But yeah, perhaps feels a little bit less appropriate. More of an honour and, yeah, kind of honouring the memory of someone involved in the creation of that game. Because I am very sad to report this week, in fact today, of the passing of Bobby Prince, who composed all of the music for Doom. Of course, he worked very closely with id Software. I believe he worked as a contractor, being a full-time rather than being a full-time employee, but certainly doesn't diminish his contribution to those games. He composed the music for the Commander Keen series of games, before that for Wolfenstein 3D, for Doom. He went on to do, he was involved with Duke Nukem 3D. He also did Rise of the Triad, and much like that Offspring album that I just talked about, I think his work was very influential on me in my taste in music today. You know, he was heavily inspired by people like Pantera, Metallica, Megadeth, you know, all those kind of heavy metal bands of the early 90s. And that influence certainly came through in Doom and in some of his other work as well. So, yeah, reported here by Tom Hall, one of the founders of id Software, one of the core team of id Software, who indeed knew him personally and worked with him very closely. He was also a Vietnam veteran. He was a qualified lawyer, a very interesting chap, Bobby Prince, in his own right, and has left us today at the ripe old age of 81 years old. So no more information about the circumstances around that, although I'm sure that will come out in time. But yeah, just wanted to honour the passing of a very, very important name who has contributed to some of my favourite games of all time. So rest in peace, Bobby Prince, and of course, thoughts with his friends and family. That's all I have for you for this week's Ramble, so thank you ever so much for joining me. You can check this out on a Friday night, every Friday, 2 minutes to midnight UK time, on my second YouTube channel, youtube.com/ReesRambles, or indeed on Spotify and the other podcasting platforms. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you for this week's Ramble. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll hopefully see you again next week. Bye.